how are we going to keep our workers safe? How are we going to understand where they are?
How can we encourage honesty and open communication rather than looking for loopholes to work anyway?
If you get ahead of the risk curve, you can make some impact.
Once you have that visual representation of where the risk is, where the safety concerns are, and as you noted, where the cost is, it kind of becomes a no-brainer.
I do understand the value of managing your assets in a business for sure, but I say the human asset is the most important of all.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Kopf, the Executive Editor of Occupational Health and Safety Magazine. Welcome to today's webinar presentation, Beyond the Vehicle, a comprehensive approach to mobile workforce safety and compliance. Today's webinar is brought to us by SafetyIQ. Many thanks to them for making today's presentation possible, and especially seeing as how it is our first executive Q&A. And the Executive Q&A program is an interesting one because it lets us learn more from industry thought leaders about various topics, and then gives all of you the opportunity to get a lot of opportunity, to interact more directly with them. And today we're talking about the fact that transportation safety goes miles beyond simple fleet vehicle telemetry and maintenance and route planning, and the fact that driver safety and health involves characteristics such as journey management, fatigue health, and the entire continuum of health and safety for the driver. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And in this webinar, I'm going to be interviewing Scott Jackson, who's the CEO of SafetyIQ. And I'm really glad that we're talking to him about today's topic, because not only is it pertinent, but then from a personal standpoint, transportation raised me. My father managed a national trucking and rail operation for the majority of his life. So it's gratifying to talk about worker safety in this context. Tell you a little bit more about Scott. He is the CEO of SafetyIQ. And he's an innovative business leader with 20 years experience delivering repeated revenue, profit, and business growth objectives with startup, turnaround, and established global corporate environments. As leader of SafetyIQ, he's helping transform workplace safety across 4 core areas: mobile worker safety, EHS, fatigue management, and training. And there's a lot of connection between those different missions. And SafetyIQ has software that harnesses the power of predictive analysis and analytics so that they can help businesses transform their safety data into actual actionable strategies. So it's a data-driven approach, but what it helps you do is, rather than react, you can kind of plan and proact. So they're really trying to bring some predictability to workplace safety. With all that said, we're ready to kick off our interview and our chance for all of you to ask Scott questions. But before we go too full into that, Scott's going to take some time to tell you a bit about his mission and that of SafetyIQ when it comes to mobile workforce safety. And then I'll ask Scott my first question. So Scott, why don't you take the stage?
Thank you, David. Really appreciate the introduction, and it's very excited to be a part of this webinar. The context, just for a couple of minutes, is, and I'll best do this through who we serve rather than who we are. So our customers in SafetyIQ are really around the industries of manufacturing, mining, oil, gas, resources, utilities, anywhere where workers have a high level of safety risk. And they're operating in over 46 countries around the world. Some of those customers are, 30 customers, 30 users. Some of them are, over 100,000 users. But one thing they have in common is they're all trying to transition from paper and hard work in their safety practices to digitally transitioning, if you like. And they're doing that with a varying array of needs, but mainly around compliance, enabling policy, quite having an impact on the culture of safety, as well as natural goals of productivity and cost prevention. In the 12 years that we've been in practice, the last 2 years, we've done a lot of workshopping with some of the leaders in the safety environment. And we've got this sort of co-vision, if you like, of transforming workplace safety practices, behaviour and performance through the power of data-driven insight and predictive analytics. It does sound lofty, and I know you touched on it too, David, but if you take a stepped approach, you can get there. And, even before AI and insights, there's this requirement for a data focus and how to capture data and how to purposefully categorize it, how to curate that data in its safety level of performance to then give you those predictive analytics. And even before that, most customers, their drive is to have the enablement of their safety applications, their safety technologies to be able to capture the data. It needs to be user-friendly. It needs to be something that they are getting great adoption of, something that makes sense in a work environment, particularly for a mobile worker, to be relevant for what they do. So with that in mind, the last 18 months, SafetyIQ has really worked on an integrated platform that's been released in the last couple of months. It really connects journey management, lone worker management, fatigue, impairment management, as well as a full EH&S system, as you'd expect. That's a little bit of the background of SafetyIQ and some of our goals and some of where we're heading with our customers. I hope to share some great customer stories with you that are, in my opinion, people that are leading the charge in mobile worker safety, and I look forward to getting into some of the questions.
All right. Well, let's dive in then. I know I'm interested in hearing a bit about some of these case examples, and certainly kind of hearing about some practical application. So let's start by delving into kind of the unique challenges of keeping remote workers safe, Scott. So compared to sort of a traditional work environment where people, are at a specific site, that kind of thing, what are some of the biggest concerns for employees or employers rather regarding isolated mobile employees?
Yeah, I guess if I take a look at some of the stats, one of the biggest concerns is that 62% of all related, work injuries are because of vehicles and related to vehicles. So that's a huge statistic. And you're right, when you've got work environments that are more traditional with lots of workers around, you've either got colleagues and supervisors that promote safety culture and following of processes and protocols. You just don't have that in a mobile worker environment. They're often isolated. Help and ability to respond is often slower, and the risk is often higher. If I had to call out probably the biggest concerns, there's two or three. I would suggest one, and it's huge and it's growing, is the litigation of board members and executives. We're talking about individuals that haven't, in their leadership capacity of an organisation, demonstrated sufficient duty of care in the policies and the journey management systems that they implement. That's probably the biggest concern I see, and a lack of awareness around that. There's one organisation I'm aware of. There were two directors, and they've been fined collectively $3 million, and they've just finished 10 months jail time for the deficiencies in their lack of duty of care. So that's a really critical concern for me. The second one, more practical in mobile workers, is communication. There's often not an ability to communicate or to check in or to proactively have two-way dialogue that says, how is your well-being? Are you safe? And hand in hand with communication, if you like, a third critical area is visibility. Visibility of workers, knowing where they are, what they're doing, or are they on task or on progress with where they intend to be, and are they doing that in a safe way? Probably the first example I can use is one of our larger clients has 56,000 odd employees. They're in professional services and engineering and resources sort of space. They had a situation where Hurricane Ilsa, which was a Category 5 hurricane, was doing a lot of damage, and it was about to hit the coast line. This particular hurricane had already taken 8 lives and caused billions of dollars of damage. There was, vessels and boats that had been damaged and sunk, etc. And, their goal was to say, well, we've got a lot of mobile workers. How this is about to hit our shoreline, how are we going to keep our workers safe? How are we going to understand where they are? So they had their teams of a couple of teams of 6 people, and it took them initially well over 2 hours to understand through flight logs and, fleet booking vehicle systems and accommodation booking systems where most of their people were, but they couldn't account for all of them. And it took them well over 2 hours to do that. What they did then is they then said, right, well, we need that visibility. And so in that circumstance, they had that one-click visibility where they knew where every single employee was at any point in time, what they were doing, where they were intending to be, whether they in a safe area, like were they in the current trajectory of the hurricane. And then most importantly, that linking it back to communication. So visibility and communication. This particular client was then able to do lots of push communication to make sure that there was people were looked after and there was a plan in place for every person. I love that company because they call their employees work family members, and it really draws close to the heart about the importance of an individual's life and how they should care about it. So yeah, that's probably a good example, but the 3 were risk of litigation, communication, and visibility.
Yeah, those are definitely big concerns right there. I was surprised to hear about the litigation and liability, especially when it comes to regulation, and that example that you provided about, some of these employers were doing jail time, that kind of thing. That's an international or, sort of universal concern, right? That's not limited to any country or anything like that. That's something that most employers might have to worry about, correct?
It's certainly not limited at all. I will say that some nations have a more advanced approach to that litigation. Some are in catch-up mode, but there's certainly evidence of that globally as we speak. And certainly in all the areas that we play, that's very, very prevalent. Yeah, totally agree.
Got it. And looks like we're getting some questions in here, and we'll get them in the pipe. This question is, do mobile workers want to be more visible? It seems to be a point of pushback in some cases. How do you change the culture in that regard?
What a totally good question, and I do say that a lot. I'll perhaps in the next example that I share, I might actually use an example that will actually help address that, because you're right, there is a lot of user pushback with some technologies.
And go for it.
So it's sort of a part of the next sort of question, if you like. It's around if we think about some of the key causes for mobile worker incidents and how organisations might address them. I think, and you can see it on the slide there, one of the key causes for mobile worker challenges is fatigue. And, it's an astonishing statistic that 25% of deaths and severe injuries on the road are caused by fatigue or impairment, right? So a lot of the common approaches that I've seen to address that are around training, looking for hazards, understanding specific training on specific vehicles that you're driving, but also a fatigue education aspect to that. And that's really, really an important aspect. Telematics is key. There are some great technologies out there, particularly the in-cab, in-vehicle cameras for real-time feedback, as well as other driver assist technologies, distracted driver and lane assist, etc. What I've found, though, is a lot of the value in some of those, telematic cameras, for example, have been used in proving that your driver was doing the right thing when another driver was at fault in an incident. So that's not actually so much about the driver's safety. It's just showing that you're doing the right thing. Because I have found that telematics and driver assist technologies, they're not the best or most comprehensive way to look at driver safety. The reason is because they only often come into play right at the end of when an incident is about to happen. A micro sleep when you're about to have a crash is not the best time to prevent it. You need to prevent it earlier, is my point. And to the question that was asked about, how do workers look at that. There is some psychosocial hazards in many drivers feeling that their privacy is being taken away from them with an in-vehicle camera, for example. They feel kind of untrusted by their employers in some companies. Not trusted to do the right thing, and it sometimes does create a bit of a cultural barrier. From my perspective, if you like, the best way to get around that is, address fatigue or impairment ahead of the risk curve. Before your drivers actually even take the wheel or are monitored by this sort of data that might impinge them in their minds, assess their fatigue well before they even jump into a vehicle. Remembering, mobile workers, they're doing irregular work hours, they're doing long travel times, they've got physical demands, they've got outcomes they've got to achieve, for their employees, and often there's no single way to judge whether they're fit for work. So I'm sort of seeing a lot of organisations introducing a fatigue assessment technology that is much more about the user and much more culturally accepting to the user, because it's about them and their safety. And as a part of that, do it early in the piece as a part of a journey management or a risk assessment plan before a journey takes place or a trip takes place or a shift that has risk is attempted. I'll give you another example that I think is really, really good in this instance. There's a port authority, and they've got lots of cars and forklifts and machinery. They're quite a big site, and so they've got lots of mobile workers in this state. Their number one goal was to try and make their staff, before starting a task or jumping behind the wheel, to assess themselves if they're fit for work. And what they did is they used an app, and it was an app-based test. It's a gamified puzzle, if you like. Bit of they wanted to put it in the hands of the user, which was what they used to get the adoption and the change. And so with this app in their hands, as I said, it's a puzzle-based app. It's based on a psychomotor vigilance test that was developed with NASA, some 90 million hours of assessment on this particular app. And what they do is they do this puzzle based on their own profile of how quickly they do it and how accurately they do it. And they might do this before just jumping in a vehicle or doing their journey plan. The beauty is, if you in this particular...
Sorry, Scott, I thought you were stopping there. Go ahead, please continue. Please continue. Yeah.
I'll round out the example because it's a good one, and there's some real good thought leaders in this particular organisation, right? The escalations that fatigue assessment does, it allows a conversation. And the managers on the floor, when they're having that conversation, they can then say, are you impaired? Are you fatigued for a reason? Have you been doing lots of double shifts? Have you, this has happened. Have you been served, legal papers that you're stressed about and kept you awake all night? Did you attend your son's 21st birthday and maybe there might be some alcohol left in the system? One of the biggest impacts that we're seeing, to be really honest, is with 28 states in the US legalizing cannabis, impairment due to cannabis is a real problem when it comes to fatigue and impairment before driving. And so now putting in place those preventative steps, because you're getting that alert through an app that promotes that conversation, is a great cultural adoption mechanism rather than actually having something imposed on you. If you lift that one step further, and this particular customer has been using it for a year, they've turned the data from when those little apps have been triggered outside their norms with their shifts, they've generated a heat map of where their risk is at different sites and at different times of the week. And then they've actually been able to transform their whole work shift rostering to reduce costs, but reduce safety. And then as a result, their workers' compensation's also gone down 40%. So a really good example of where if you get ahead of the risk curve, you can make some impact.
Yeah, that's fascinating right there. Just when you said heat map, my brain immediately clicked because I'm like, well, there you go. Once you have that kind of visual representation of where the risk is, where the safety concerns are, and as you noted, where the cost is, it kind of becomes a no-brainer. Good question here, real kind of nuts and bolt technical question. How do you monitor a mobile worker when there's no cellular service in the work area? Do you use satellite? How do you approach that?
I love these questions. I have another example coming up as well that talks to satellite coverage and linkage when you don't have cellular coverage. In fact, I can jump to it if you like. You're happy for me to jump a few slides and get into that story?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, let me... Yeah, so this particular one, this is about visibility and communication, and cellular coverage is a big thing, right? If I get you to look at the image on the left, the purple represents where cellular coverage is prevalent in the US. And I probably want you more to focus on the white spots, because they're where cellular coverage is not. And even on the eastern seaboard where you've got greater coverage, there are white spots where you don't have coverage, and that's critical for your mobile workers. So understanding that is critical. One of our clients, they've got 3,000 employees. 250 of them use our platform, and they're traveling in remote regions, right? Their three scenarios are that they've got remote regions, but they're also traveling on some bad roads in a couple of states that have some less maintained roads, shall we say. But also wildlife is a bit of a problem. So they've had a couple of rollovers where they've hit wildlife and or had a bad road situation where they've run off the road. And that particular situation happened where they didn't always have coverage. So their approach was they started by implementing a journey plan with a risk assessment as a protocol of their business, so that everybody knew where the journeys were, planned at least. They also implemented a series of proactive check-ins, so that in this company's example, they might be on an 8-hour haul or a drive. Every 2 hours, they have a proactive check-in that works regardless of cellular coverage or not, and I'll explain how. They did recognise they had a good investment in some telematics devices, but they recognised that even the severe braking or a collision or a rollover that had been notified from the in-vehicle monitoring system, without cellular coverage in this particular instance, they couldn't get that message back to head office or to the managers that cared about it. So what they did was they really wanted to put in a single solution that integrated with satellite technology. And that's the most important part here. So that they actually had coverage in those spots where cellular coverage was not available. You were able to pinpoint exactly every employee, particularly when there was a missed check-in, so that there was an immediacy of knowing where your workers were at risk. But don't leave it to just knowing that data point. Here's the most important thing and it's back to communication, is be able to push and receive communication in those non-cellular coverage environments. You know, and are you okay? And a receive, yes, I'm okay, or heaven forbid, no, I'm not. And there's a distress button requirement or an SOS reaction. So yeah, this particular company in those cellular challenged areas used our platform so that we could use satellite tech in that regard. They integrated it so that there wasn't just like lots of point solutions of safety. So it's all one platform. So their journey plan, their risk assessments, their check-ins, their escalated workflows with their managers, the IVMS data feed into it if there was a rollover or a collision. And they themselves also had a full end-to-end integrated approach to an emergency response centre as well, so that if in the event there was no co-workers in the near vicinity, there was an immediate response by the local authorities. Their goal was one end-to-end solution and total visibility, which was really, really good. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
I think that answered that question asker's question quite a bit. But there's another one that's related that's just come in. And just let me remind folks out in the audience, if you want to ask Scott a question about mobile workforce safety, visibility, and as it's related to transportation and all that good stuff, all you got to do is use the Ask a Question portion of your console, and your question will go into our queue. So this one is, can a user be monitored individually even if they frequently use different vehicles? In other words, is it more about the vehicle or is it more about the user? I think it's the latter, but I'll let you flesh it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best question, because it's all about the safety of the individual for me. Our focus is, use telematics, use IVMS, use the data that comes from it to help you. But the goal for me is keeping your employees safe. So for me, then putting something like a device in your hand, that's about the individual then. And if that individual travels, most of our companies, customers, they will use us before the trip. They'll use us during a trip in any type of vehicle, but then often they're outside of the vehicle performing their duty, their work, their service. And so that lone worker management, that integrated process, it keeps the worker safe. So it's all about the worker, and the technology is all tracking the worker, not the vehicle. I do understand the value of managing your assets in a business, for sure. But I say the human asset is the most important of all.
There you go. That's the ultimate fleet management, right? Just a real quick question. When it comes to these different aspects of the software that you offer, this all falls under the SafetyIQ name. In other words, there's not different names for different portions of the software, correct?
No, not at all. I mean, so for example, the fatigue assessment and management, the fatigue and impairment app, it's a part of the SafetyIQ platform. It's a module. It's something that you can choose, something that you can take standalone or as a part of an integrated safety solution across the whole platform, for sure.
Okay. Couple fatigue questions. This one's a good one. There's a lot of pushback. It's funny, this is a second pushback question, but it's a good one. But there's a lot of pushback on real-time monitoring, especially as it's more reactive. Do you find that fatigue monitoring is more accepted as it's more focused on the individual, and it's also something that's preventable?
Yeah, another great question. I absolutely do, and I actually see it in practice. And I'd say 9 out of 10 of our clients roll out fatigue because it is more acceptable, and the change, because it's a gamified app, it's simple and it's in the hands of the user. They're protecting themselves, and that's probably the way that we've rolled it out. In the 1 or 2 clients where there's been a more difficult change implementation, what we first do is we roll out that so that there's a self-play element to it without management oversight. And then when they feel comfortable with it, they introduce the management oversight. And even though we've done that with a couple of clients because they needed to, at the end of the day, they love it so much that they see it as and it's 60 seconds. It's not an impost on the day. That's the most important thing. You tend to get the much more user adoption when it's simple and it's easy and it's actually to their benefit, rather than seen as a monitoring tool or an oversight Big Brother kind of tool. It's not that at all.
Got it. And then transitioning over to the company, here in the States, I've personally seen in previous work, where driver fatigue is often connected to their total health. There's a big concern with obstructive sleep apnea. And then, so those drivers are then, required to, be using like a PAP therapy device or something like that. But the reimbursement, since the US has private healthcare, is then tied to their proven use of those devices. And in the healthcare world, they have tracking, they can monitor the use of that CPAP. I'm curious, this turns into kind of a complicated stew, I guess, is what I'm leading up to for the employer. And I'm curious, is software such as SafetyIQ able to help them kind of track that and manage that?
I think the answer is, it lies in, as I was saying in the introduction, around how you assemble data. and how you use that data. You know, there are a lot of third-party pieces of data that if you assemble it well and with thought and with structure, you can take advantage of it. So use of those devices like, you know, that machine that helps them in that scenario, other data like, you know, third-party data like the status of road condition or the status of weather that's predicted to hit a certain area at a certain time, along with your pattern of what you do or automatically with your own safety analytics and your safety activities in your business. When you start to assemble all of those pieces of data together, that's when you can find rivers of gold in terms of changing some behavior or changing a work practice. In short, we don't have any integrations with that specific example that you talked about, but that's the sort of space that we play in making those things happen.
Got it. Yeah, it certainly creates the toolbox that you can use to address it. That's for sure. So curious. I'll ask one more reader question, and then I want to get into another interview question, and that is, or one more audience question rather, and that is, how do you combat driver fatigue on long trips? You know, where you've got somebody who's going to be, you know, pulling a 8-10 hour day, you know, on the road. You know, what do you do in that instance?
Yeah, I think you have to have an end-to-end solution. It's not a point solution. You know, I've seen some some great in-cab alerts and things that bark at you as a driver if you're starting to get weary. You know, they're great to have, but if you have an end-to-end plan, then you'll know what the risk level is. If you know what the risk level is, then you can implement certain things that will help you along the way. One of the key things is naturally a check-in. You know, it's a forced every period of time. Some clients say 2 hours, some clients say a certain amount of miles. There is an opportunity for a check-in. There's mandatory rest naturally in certain legislative hemispheres, but I think that you can only do that when you've got a risk assessment that you've done up front to know what those risks are and what the length of the journey is. And then with fatigue, you don't have to do it just at the start of the shift. You can do it progressively so that you've got alerts or reminders to say, all right, am I okay or am I not? And, you know, there are some, you know, if I think about, we've got, you know, clients we're having good conversations with in the ice road trucking environment where, you know, well beyond 8 hours is a normal day in a very harsh environment, and it's riddled with risk. So there are steps you can do, but it all comes down to the plan. It all comes down to monitoring that level of risk and then what you can put into play.
Makes sense. So let's do another interview question, and that is, you know, in our webinar description, we mentioned going beyond just vehicle data, and I'm curious, can you elaborate on that? You know, is there a holistic approach? You know, what is this holistic approach, and why is taking that kind of super broad approach so crucial?
Yep, totally. I guess when it comes to mobile workers, and I also align remote workers and lone workers in the same bucket in my mind.
Yeah.
I sort of said it before, but I think the important thing is to get ahead of the curve, get ahead of that risk curve. Many people just aren't thinking about the planning and the preparation before. It's kind of a holistic approach that I think moves us from reactive to proactive to predictive safety. You know, in reactive, we might capture our incidents well or our near miss as well, and we'll report on them, you know, super well, and we'll make sure that we don't make the same problems in the future. You know, in proactive, you know, we push the bar a bit further. We actually implement safety measures and initiatives, you know, to then we can mitigate some of those safety risks. But I think the most is in predictive, where we use data insights and we start to anticipate and project where those safety risks and the levels and the frequency are highest to make sure that we can then avoid them in the first place with either policy or systems or decisions or actions that we want to put in play in our safety policies. In this particular slide, probably the best way for me to give you is another customer example.
Please do. Yeah.
It's a smaller company. They've got 200 employees. They're an exploration company, and their goal, was to prevent incidents, but also ensure that there was a safety solution in place for the rare occasions when their employees did, in fact, have an incident or a crash or a rollover. And in their circumstance, they had invested in IVMS. So they had devices that would capture G-force harsh braking event, which is usually a crash. From my perspective, I'm not sure if can you see? I'm not sure if you can see a pointer on the screen at the moment for your listeners, but the piece at the top there that's called telematics impact, that's the part of journey management where those types of investments in technology do have an impact. My biggest suggestion, and where I see most of the leaders in this space going, is in the three areas to the left of that in this slide. So really understanding when you're logging your activity, understanding what type of activity that is, not just thinking about it digitally as a car trip, but somebody might have flown from one state to another before they hire a car and then drive out to a particular site. Then they're on a different machine or a digger or some sort of thing that they're using. In this exploration company, it was a drilling machine. Tracking all of that end-to-end journey is where it captures the risk. It's not just about when you turn up on site. Then I guess moving that forward, you're able to then, let me have a little look here. If you do a risk assessment, and many of these clients, this one too, customize their risk assessment to their current environment, because there were parts of their roles, parts of their jobs that had higher risk than others. That allowed then an opportunity for management to be a part of the decision making for the risk. If the risk was considered higher in a risk assessment, management would be then a part of the approval process for that journey or that trip or that activity to happen. And that's really important then, because you've got eyes on. So together you understand the risk and you're capturing it. They may even interject and have a conversation about, let's approach this differently to mitigate the risk before it starts. And then obviously when they start the journey in that area where you've got the three vertical spheres in the slide, users are able to check in. And if they don't check in, there's an escalation. If they miss a check-in, which is as simple as a button press if you're actually driving, then your manager can get in contact with you and say, hey, are you okay? And if not, there is the SOS trigger to then integrate with emergency response centres. I think having that end-to-end, that more holistic approach that goes well before a journey or an activity is probably the biggest theme out of what we're seeing leaders take into the market today. And ultimately, doing this through one single pane of glass, if you're able to understand who's about to go on a trip, where they are, what they're doing, and you can see that on a map and you can see that in a table, whichever works for you as a safety manager, that's incredibly powerful.
It's definitely the kind of dashboards you want. So just to kind of real quick, if people want to in the audience want to find out more about SafetyIQ, where can they go?
If they want to, certainly at the end of this slide deck, there's a QR code, and feel free to grab a scan of that. Feel free to look at our online presence. We're head officed in the US, but we do have offices in different places. I'm currently taking this webinar from Australia. Look us up, SafetyIQ.com as well. And there's also an email at the end of this if you wanted to contact us through our media as well. So have a look on the last slide of this presentation. And yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we'll keep that up there for folks. We just had a couple people ask that in the question, so I figured I'd get that out there. Just so everybody knows, Scott is doing this at like 3 o'clock in the morning, Australia time. So thank you, Scott, for being such a trooper.
I have my caffeine hit. That's all I can do.
Right. Talk about fatigue management. So
it is funny.
Now, go ahead.
No, you're right.
So,
Thank you.
this was a good question. You had mentioned earlier about the fact that several U.S. states, about half the United States have implemented basically legalized weed, and so then somebody does ask, how does the software management fatigue? How does the software monitor fatigue caused by worker use of a drug substance, while on duty remotely, or it could have been the night before, or whatever, and it's still in their system. Is there a way to monitor for that?
Yeah, so it's so what it is not a drug test. Politically, there's a lot of challenge, I know, in implementing drug tests for employees. It's frowned upon in many environments. So what this does do is it is a cognitive test that is based on your profile of how fast and how accurate you do the test, and it's done only at a point in time. So at that point in time, when a worker does their test, it says, how is this test compared to the norm of how I would go as a user, how Scott would normally perform. And so if I'm normally performing and doing well and I'm fit for my job, for my role type, and then all of a sudden my impairment, I'm slower or I'm less accurate, that's the flag that happens. So the testing that's been done over those 90 million hours has shown that weed is one of those things that has flagged, I guess, an outside of tolerance trigger. So it's been successful in that regard. And same, other substances as well have been able to show up. But it's not a blood test, just to be really clear.
Yeah,
it's an impairment. It's an impairment test. Are you impaired from your normal state of operability?
Well, that's an interesting one too, because it's also related to other concerns. Obviously the NSC has a real big push to address the concern of opioid use that's in the work environment, and so this could have the double blessing of being able to catch somebody who's having a more serious issue. I
think that's a good point. I've just done an interview
this is a good
with Lorraine Martin.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
please.
Didn't mean to. You're dead right, and we've been working with NSC in this regard. So I've been working with Lorraine Martin. We did an interview as well, in particular around some of that challenge, and she's got a guy, John, who's working on some of the strategies there. Fatigue and impairment, and particularly around the opioids, around road hazards, it's a major problem, and we need to do something about it. I think this is one of the ways we can make a change.
There you go. And another fatigued member of the webinar is Asif, who says, "Hey, it's 14 in the morning here." So he's only 14 minutes into the day. So Asif, good for you. Thanks for staying up with us. This is a good one, and that is talking about loopholes and talking about the fact that workers will try to work their way around things. And this is a great question. Fatigue management is important, but when drivers aren't paid, they don't work. How can we encourage honesty and open communication rather than looking for loopholes to work anyway? So somebody's fatigued. How do we get them to go, what, I shouldn't be working, and I need to own up to that? Are there ways to foster that, and are there ways that technology can help foster that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the culture of safety is the most important, right? You have to be honest with yourself. You're putting yourself at risk. So education is a big part of this. Training is a big part of this. Having trusting relationships with you and your employees, it's hard to do sometimes. And yes, you're right. They need to get paid. So there's a pressure to try and work for some employees if they're fatigued. I believe, and I'm a technologist, I think that there are answers that are really simple. That if you have the right technology and it complements your cultural adoption and your program of safety as an embedded culture in your organization, you'll get the best results. there's no one-stop shop, which is why, when I was looking at this slide, a holistic view, if you have many catch points, you'll be more effective than trying to find a silver bullet. But the question's, really sage. It's a combination of cultural adoption and use of technology where it makes sense. And where it makes sense is the most important. It's got to be right for the role type. It's got to be easy to use. It's got to be in a value to the actual end user as much as it is the safety director and the board that want to make sure their company employees are safe.
Got it. We've got more questions coming in. I just want to remind everybody, if you do want to ask Scott a question about today's topic, all you have to do is use the Ask a Question portion of your console, and it'll go into our inbox. Here's a good one. I'll ask a few more audience questions, 2 or 3 more, and then we'll go into the next interview question. This is, what would you say is the minimum record keeping and training requirements a company should maintain if there are multiple locations and workers who drive their personal vehicles back and forth? So that's an interesting one. They're going, so you got a company, it's got lots of different sites. Employees are definitely mobile, but they're mobile in their own vehicles. How do you track that? How do you keep records? And how do you train so that these people are staying safe when it comes to, all the safety aspects related to that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's complex, right? Because it's not always employees. Sometimes it's contractors. Sometimes it's employees with their own vehicles. The thing that we try and do is we try and make it about the person, not about the vehicle as much. Having said that, though, a couple of good companies I've seen have had a grey fleet policy where when they've got company cars, they've got their minimum safety thresholds of the type of vehicle that they have, so that there's minimum standards. They try and have a grey vehicle policy that says if you're driving your own vehicle, these are the minimum standards that we require you to be utilising in this place of work. That's probably one step. I don't know. I think whatever technology you use, whatever app you use to track and measure the risk of any work task, it needs to capture the things that aren't only the data points that you currently have. And one of those might be what is an employee's length of trip, private car or otherwise, from their home to their work. A lot of people don't consider that. There's a mining organization in the US that there is no accommodation on site, and so there's a 2-hour commute between work each day, both before shift and after shift. And they weren't considering originally what that meant. They were considering all the safety on site, but they weren't considering the journey in their private cars from their home to site. Because when you look at that, you can get some fatigue, you can get some stress. And then when employees were having incidents on their way home after a long day, there was this question of where does the obligation lie? Where does the legal obligation sit to assess fatigue in those circumstances? Because fatigue can build up, as you know. I don't have a silver bullet for the answer to that question, but I again suggest that a multidisciplined approach, a holistic approach, is probably the only way to capture it and answer it.
Got it. And this will be a quickie question before I dive into the next interview question, and that is they ask they ask an acronym, and this acronym is used in one of 2 ways. So Janetta asks, is there a built-in MVR management piece too? And that could either mean moving violation record or motor vehicle record. So I'm curious, they're kind of related. Is there a way for the software to manage the paperwork aspects of both the vehicle and the driver?
I would suggest that you do look at both, and you do look at when you're looking at investing in technology and you're trying to transition from paper to digital, look at a system that is flexible enough to have forms and workflow that you can configure. So then you're configuring that for whatever the policy is that you're trying to implement, whether it be about vehicle maintenance, vehicle monitoring, vehicle management, asset management, and or the safety of your individuals. Obviously, our business is focused on the safety of the individual. But yeah, if you choose a platform like SafetyIQ that does have that flexibility to then configure that program, that's probably the best chance you can get to do both.
All right. And then I'm going to be very selfish, and I'm going to ask another interview question. And that is, Scott, we've been talking about real world examples. Do you have another real world example, that you can share, maybe a case study of how SafetyIQ has helped a company address a mobile workforce safety challenge?
Yeah, I do. And it's a good one for us. It's been a long-lived customer. It's Ventia, Rig and Well Services, and they've had a lot of workers that have been required to travel a long distance, both rural and remote roads. They came to us. They had a couple of fatigue-related incidents, and they realised that their paper-based system just wasn't really sufficient, and it certainly was cumbersome to manage. They implemented our software. They focused very much on journey management and fatigue management. And that is the theme of a lot of the things in today's webinar. In their journey planning, they wanted to make sure that the workers inputted all of the journey details. As I said before, if they're flying into a place, or they're driving out to a place, or then they're jumping on their particular device or vehicle. It includes destination and the timing and the planning of that. They put that into the platform. They have their fatigue and risk assessments, a combination of the two. So some question-based stuff along with the technology that we were speaking of. And they do that pre-risk travel. And they're one of those companies that I mentioned before that was able to identify different risk levels and therefore involve managers in different levels of decisions based on that risk profile. They were very much about monitoring. So they had what they called safe travel monitoring, where they wanted to have these check-ins on devices that were personal to them, so that, as in the drivers, so that there was a great deal of communication, I guess, between their managers and staff. They like other examples had a missed check-in protocol where they had an escalated workflow that was automated, so that if a driver misses a check-in, there's an alert, and it hits the desk of whoever you want to configure your system to be. It might be your immediate manager. And then if that manager doesn't pick up after a certain amount of times, or come in and say, yes, I've validated that they're okay, then there's another level of escalation that went to a broader series of management, so that the board were never left unawares of an incident, because escalation periods and timing and who was escalated to was really, really well thought through in this organisation. And that notification process happened pretty well. They were also one of those that wanted to make sure that their workers were safe even outside of the vehicle. So, a lot of their workers would arrive on site, and they'd be outside the vehicle doing what they needed to do, keeping track of their safety through a lone worker part of the application was really, really critical to them. This example is a good one for me because they've been a long-standing customer of ours, and they're happy to report that they have had 0 fatigue-related incidents since we implemented in 2016. They've had 70% reduction in costs when they switched to our platform, because they used to manage all of their remote workers and mobile workers through a call center management type setup. And certainly their leadership group, their safety directors were saving 37 hours every month by eliminating a lot of those manual processes that they originally had. And this again is one of those ones where it hits the heart, because right back at the very start, there was one of their middle managers was quite a stubborn middle manager, and kind of didn't like the change that this might bring to his part of the business. So impactful was his evidence of using the platform that he now, for his own private family long vacations in a car, he uses all of the systems and the processes to make sure that his family is safe. So he's now obviously quite an advocate, but I think it's an important thing to learn. If it makes sense, people will use it. And if it makes sense, people will be safe.
Absolutely. So, all right, so let's go. We've got time for maybe a couple more audience questions, and then I think that we are going to go into final thought. That said, listen, if we've got a question that's unanswered, don't worry. SafetyIQ will follow up with you guys. You know, if you've got additional questions, use that Ask a Question console that I mentioned before, and get your questions into the queue, because even if Scott can't get to it, somebody will answer your question offline. So you'll be in good shape. This is a good training question, you know, and kind of related to what you were just talking about. What are some internal safety trainings that can be conducted for a fleet vehicle company, you know, that'll be effective?
Yeah, I'll say from the outset, you know, my company doesn't focus on training modules per se. So if you want to know what courses are the best or what programs are good, there are 1,000 programs out there. I would suggest that the thing I can help with is the management and the tracking and the monitoring of your program of training. And that's important for me, because if you've got a policy where you want to be trained on a certain vehicle, or if you want to be trained on fatigue, or if you want to be trained on how to do something, the validity of that certification, the management of that certification for your employees and contractors that are working on site is really, really important to keep updated. Having a workflow then that presents reminders when your certification's about to expire is then also getting you ahead of the game. That example where I called out before, where 2 board directors were sued and ended up fined $3 million and some jail time, that was because they didn't have this kind of training tracking in place to make sure that all of their employees doing the right tasks were certified at the right times. So yeah, really, I probably only answered half of that question, but having programs in place, I think, are as important as the course you choose.
Yeah, no, but it's also it's a really kind of fascinating point, you know, that there's training, right? But now you've got tools that can really help you assess the effectiveness of this training. Because it's one thing to just, you know, implement a training program. It's another thing to actually see the needle move, right? And this is how you see the needle move for sure. So, Scott, we're kind of coming up into the end. I wanted to ask more questions, but I couldn't. I'm curious, do you have any kind of final thoughts here when it comes to our discussion and all the questions we received from the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say thank you for the opportunity to have a chat with you today. There's a couple of themes that we tried to bring across that I'm seeing leaders in our safety community push through, and I encourage us as a community to continue to push through. The first one is, you know, get culture of safety through adoption, because with great adoption of a technology becomes great data capture. With great data capture, we can get those data-driven insights. We can then move to a predictive level of safety, so there's no surprises, and we can then really transform the work practices that we have in our safety environments and behavior and performance. So that's the first sort of theme. The second theme, you know, I would suggest is remember getting ahead of the curve. Don't think just about mobile workers as being in a car only and car data. Think about the plan. Think about the journey plan, the risk assessments, the fatigue assessments. Get ahead of the game and take the risk out where it matters. You know, I think that'll only help you in your transition of moving from reactive safety to proactive to predictive. And you know, I wish everyone good luck on your safety journey.
There you go. There you go. Well, Scott, it's been a fascinating discussion. I wish it could have gone longer. I'm going to remind everybody that right here we've got contact information. You can take a picture of that QR code to learn more about the software, more about SafetyIQ. And again, Scott, as you mentioned, they can also just go to SafetyIQ.com, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And there's an email there, media@safetyiq.com as well. By all means, ask away, ask questions. We'll try and come back to those questions that we didn't get answered today. But David, thank you for your time as well. Appreciate it.
Are you kidding me? This has been a pleasure. Scott, I was just going to say, thank you so much for being the first of our executive Q&A program. This has been a great way to break it in, and you know, it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it's been a fun conversation. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And also thanks to SafetyIQ for sponsoring this program. You guys made today's presentation. And thanks to my coworker, Tammy Renee, who's in the background running our production. She keeps this thing humming in fifth gear. I'm just going to keep the automotive puns coming. But she makes this show run so flawlessly. So thank you, Tammy. And last but not least, thanks to everybody out there in the audience who listened in and participated. We got a slew of questions, really made for a fun, interactive Q&A. But for now, I think we're going to knock things off, so we're going to have to sign off. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day, great rest of the week. But for now, goodbye until our next OH&S webinar.